Peachy Books presents COVID-19 The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab and Thierry Malaret. Read to you by PeachyTO. 1.1.2 Velocity. The above firmly points the finger at technological progress and globalization as the primary culprits responsible for greater interdependence. In addition, they have created such a culture of immediacy that it's not an exaggeration to claim that in today's world, everything moves much faster than before. If just one thing were to be singled out to explain this astonishing increase in velocity, it would undoubtedly be the Internet. More than half, 52% of the world's population is now online, compared to less than 8% 20 years ago. In 2019, more than 1.5 billion smartphones, a symbol and vector of velocity that allows us to be reached anywhere and at any time, were sold around the world. The Internet of Things, IoT, now connects 22 billion devices in real time, ranging from cars to hospital beds, electric grids and water station pumps, to kitchen ovens and agricultural irrigation systems. This number is expected to reach 50 billion or more in 2030. Other explanations for the rise in velocity point to the scarcity element. As societies get richer, time becomes more valuable and is therefore perceived as ever more scarce. This may explain studies showing that people in wealthy cities always walk faster than in poor cities. They have no time to lose. No matter what the casual explanation is, the endgame of all this is clear. As consumers and producers, spouses and parents, leaders and followers, we are all being subject to constant, albeit discontinuous, rapid change. We can see velocity everywhere. Whether it's a crisis, social discontent, technological developments and adoption, geopolitical upheaval, the financial markets, and of course, the manifestation of infectious diseases. Everything now runs on fast forward. As a result, we operate in a real-time society, with the nagging feeling that the pace of life is ever increasing. This new culture of immediacy, obsessed with speed, is apparent in all aspects of our lives, from just-in-time supply chains to high-frequency trading, from speed dating to fast food. It is so pervasive that some pundits call this new phenomenon the dictatorship of urgency. It can indeed take extreme forms. Research performed by scientists at Microsoft shows, for example, that being slower by no more than 250 milliseconds, a quarter of a second, is enough for a website to lose hits to its faster competitors. The all-embracing result is that the shelf life of a policy, a product, or an idea, and the life cycle of a decision maker or a project are contracting sharply and often unpredictably. Nothing illustrated this more vividly than the breakneck speed with which COVID-19 progressed in March 2020. In less than a month, from the maelstrom provoked by the staggering speed at which the pandemic engulfed most of the world, a whole new era seemed to emerge. The beginning of the outbreak was thought to have taken place in China sometime earlier, but the exponential global progression of the pandemic took many decision-makers and a majority of the public by surprise because we generally find it cognitively hard to grasp the significance of exponential growth. Consider the following in terms of days for doubling. If a pandemic grows at 30% a day, as COVID-19 did around mid-March for some of the worst affected countries, registered cases, or deaths, will double in a little more than 2 days. If it grows at 20%, it will take between 4 and 5 days. And if it grows at 10%, it will take just more than a week. Expressed differently, at the global level, it took COVID-19 3 months to reach 100,000 cases, 12 days to double to 200,000 cases, 4 days to reach 300,000 cases, and then 400,000 and 500,000 cases were reached in 2 days each. These numbers make our heads spin. Extreme velocity in action. Exponential growth is so baffling to our cognitive functions that we may often deal with it by developing exponential myopia, thinking of it as nothing more than very fast. In a famous experiment conducted in 1975, 2 psychologists found that when we have to predict an exponential process, we often underestimate it by a factor of 10. Understanding this growth dynamic and the power of exponentials clarifies why velocity is such an issue and why the speed of intervention to curb the rate of growth is so crucial. Ernest Hemingway understood this. In his novel The Sun Also Rises, 2 characters have the following conversation. "How did you go bankrupt?" Bill asked. "2 ways," Mike said. "Gradually, then suddenly." The same tends to happen for big systemic shifts and disruption in general. Things tend to change gradually at first, and then all at once. Expect the same for the macro reset. Not only does velocity take extreme forms, but it can also engender perverse effects. Impatience, for example, is one, the effects of which can be seen similarly in the behavior of participants in the financial markets, with new research suggesting that momentum trading, based on velocity, leads stock prices to deviate persistently from their fundamental value or correct price, and in that of voters in an election. The latter will have a critical relevance in the post-pandemic era. Governments, by necessity, take a while to make decisions and implement them. They are obliged to consider many different constituency groups and competing interests, balance domestic concerns with external considerations, and secure legislative approval before putting into motion the bureaucratic machinery to action all these decisions. By contrast, voters expect almost immediate policy results and improvements, which, when they don't arrive fast enough, lead to almost instantaneous disappointment. This problem of asynchronicity between 2 different groups, policymakers and the public, whose time horizon differs so markedly, will be acute and very difficult to manage in the context of the pandemic. The velocity of the shock and the depth of the pain it has inflicted will not and cannot be matched with equal velocity on the policy side. Velocity also led many observers to establish a false equivalence by comparing seasonal flu with COVID-19. This comparison, made again and again in the early months of the pandemic, was misleading and conceptually erroneous. Let's take the example of the U.S. to hammer out the point and better grasp the role played by velocity in all of this. According to the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, between 39 and 56 million Americans contracted the flu during the 2019 to 2020 winter season, with between 24,000 and 62,000 deaths. By contrast, and according to Johns Hopkins University, on 24 June 2020, more than 2.3 million were diagnosed with COVID-19, and almost 121,000 people had died. But the comparison stops there. It is meaningless for 2 reasons. 1, the flu numbers correspond to the estimated total flu burden, while the COVID-19 figures are confirmed cases. And 2, the seasonal flu cascades in gentle waves over a period of up to 6 months in an even pattern, while the COVID-19 virus spreads like a tsunami in a hotspot pattern, in a handful of cities and regions where it concentrates, and, in doing so, can overwhelm and jam healthcare capacities, monopolizing hospitals to the detriment of non-COVID-19 patients. The second reason, the velocity with which the COVID-19 pandemic surges and the suddenness with which clusters emerge, makes all of the difference and renders the comparison with the flu irrelevant. Velocity lies at the root of the first and second reasons. In a vast majority of countries, the speed with which the epidemic progressed made it impossible to have sufficient testing capabilities, and it then overwhelmed many national health systems equipped to deal with the predictable, recurrent, and rather slow seasonal flu, but not with a super-fast pandemic. Another important and far-reaching consequence of velocity is that decision-makers have more information and more analysis than ever before, but less time to decide. For politicians and business leaders, the need to gain a strategic perspective collides ever more frequently with the day-to-day pressures of immediate decisions, particularly obvious in the context of the pandemic and reinforced by complexity, as we see in the next section. If you've enjoyed this reading, please let me know by clicking the like button, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell so that you know when another story is available. Please visit peachybooks.ca to read my reviews and have some lively discussions about great books. Thanks for listening.